won't give too much away, but their relationship ends and she moves to Berlin, where she has a bit of a mild spiral and starts making up different personalities on her OkCupid dates that she goes on. And this is the first OkCupid date that she goes on, and she encounters someone who calls himself a relationship anarchist, which she has no idea what that is when she goes on to the date. And this is the beginning of the date. Relationship anarchy, or RA, is a philosophy that rejects definitions and rules, the man told me, drinking a Moscow Mule, the ring on his pinky finger distracting from an otherwise normal outfit. The ring hadn't been featured in any of his photos. He had a disarmingly soothing accent, a combination of springtime allergies and having grown up in Sydney with a Korean mother and Scottish father, an upper-class Commonwealth fluidity atop a bed of congestion, garnished with a distant staccato. Everything he said sounded right, even when it was totally ludicrous. The hair, shiny and thick, long but not too long, likely contained some subtle product suggesting confidence and control. He had studied German in school and had lived in Berlin for 7 years, but when he spoke the language to the bartender, the consonants didn't manage to transcend the softness of his voice, though she replied in her own accented German and not in English. That was not how anyone had ever responded to my attempts at German, even when I thought they were competent. Relationship anarchy was conceived in 2006 by a Swede named Andy Nordgren, and its adherents believed that because love is not a limited resource, traditional hierarchical relationships that treat it as such are not just unnecessary, but harmful, perpetuating toxic retrograde attitudes that equate love with ownership. One should allow space in one's life for the kind of intimacy that can be cut off when one designates a single person as special and reserved, and therefore owed and owing. Even designating a category of relationship as special and reserved was poison, he said. Romantic relationships are not better than platonic or familial ones. The ingrained belief that romantic love should be what life's organizing principle is inextricably linked to patriarchy and the oppression of minorities, the poor, and immigrants, among other populations, he added. The resulting expectations kill love at the root. When caretaking duties are foisted onto individuals and families rather than supplied and paid for by the state as they should be, he said, the state must make it seem like this is the natural and noble situation. Propaganda, marriage, is obviously propaganda, he said, but so are all conventional relationships, because all conventional relationships cannot help but situate themselves in relation to marriage, whether they are like marriage or on track to marriage or on track to being like marriage or not like marriage. Marriage is all-encompassing, in other words, and cannot but enforce hierarchy, he said. Thus, ritualized domestic exclusion begets systemic exclusion via our admiration and craving for exclusivity. He cleared his throat. He failed to clear his throat, and then he tried again, and he took a very small sip of his drink, the gender sting of which did not seem to help. Relationship anarchy, he continued, explodes not just exclusivity, but the possibility of exclusivity, almost recovered he had by, well, like the name says, applying anarchist principles to interpersonal relationships. Relationship anarchy worked by flattening all hierarchies among all relationships. To an outsider, he acknowledged, it sounds like polyamory. Relationship anarchy naturally eliminates the expectation of arbitrary sexual and romantic fidelity within an individual relationship, thereby lessening the sense of hierarchy among romantic partners. But it's really sort of the opposite of polyamory. For years, polyamorists have been trying to convince the public that theirs is a community with rules and boundaries. Ours, he said, is decidedly not. By defining our lives by what we don't believe in, we can get closer to freedom from pain and oppression. Ideally, we envision our world as a constantly and beautifully turning kaleidoscope of not friendships, not affairs, and not marriages. There are no commitments and no guarantee that a sexual or romantic relationship will be more quote unquote important than a friendship, because all relationships are free to grow or shrink or change as suits both parties, provided both engage in enthusiastic consent. Saying no labels sounds juvenile, he knew, but there were no labels, only ideals: respect, trust, communication, autonomy. We were about 20 minutes into our date when the man felt he should make his customary disclosure. He had made a 90-degree turn from a lively description of the classes he taught at a high school to, so before I get any further, I have to talk a little bit about how I live. And he ran a tan hand through his hair. I was surprised. His ideological commitments weren't at all visible in his personal style. On my way to the bar, I decided to tell him that my father had written a seminal geography textbook in the 80s and that he'd recently died, leaving me $3 million, but I never got the chance. He outlined the above as I nodded with a look of strained neutrality on my face, and when he reached the any questions portion of the talk, I knew this was my opportunity to speak. So I didn't want to waste it on the half-assed fantasies I'd lifted from the lives of people I was jealous of in New York City. I began by agreeing marriage should be abolished. It was a huge and stupid institution that persisted entirely through the various racket industries that needed it and through sexism and denialism about the human spirit. I was in general in favor of polyamory also, though in practice had found it incompatible with the sort of people I wanted to date, who stereotyped polyamorists as weird, sweaty devotees of certain uncool music festivals. However, I also suspected there had to be a catch. This was an ethos, after all, that promised you would never have to make any commitment to anyone at all. I asked him how it worked. Thank you. I'm done.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute myself, but I figured it out now.
No, it's okay.
Yay! Everyone is like clapping and cheering in private. You just have to take it on faith. Lauren, I'm so excited to be a part of your launch. I just wanted to start by saying, like, congratulations. There's so many awesome people here right now. And congratulations to all of us for overcoming whatever forces might have prevented us from attending a Zoom book launch. I sound like a yoga teacher. I'm like, thank yourself for showing up on the mat today. But seriously, like, we did it. We did it, guys. So I wanted to start by addressing my mean tweet, as so many of your reviewers had. I really did mean it in like the nicest possible way. But if I thought about it for like half a second longer, I probably would have used a different word than the unfortunately gendered bitch.
Someone asked me about it, and I told her, I'm pretty sure Emily didn't mean it in a bad way. Like, the history of reclaiming bitch, I thought, was completed, and we had reclaimed it, and now we'd moved on to other words to reclaim. So if anyone thinks that there's animosity between Emily and I because she called me a bitch, that is just not true.
No, I'm mostly just jealous of Lauren because she's so tall. But I wanted to also make it clear that I do think, like, the spirit of my mean tweet is that I do think it takes really enormous like brass balls to be a very unsparing critic and then do the thing that many critics never do, which is like create a work of art. What's your relationship to criticism now? Like, since you have written a novel, like, has it changed the way you look at other people's novels to have been through the process of bringing one into the world?
I think not. No, not really. The short answer is no. I have worked, I guess, in the sort of publishing literary sphere for my whole adult life, and it's true that I have not been on this side of it, but I think and hope that, like, bringing a spirit of fairness, whether you're writing a positive review or a negative review or a neutral review, which I think, often can be just as sort of like perplexing, and you sort of read a neutral review and you're like, I have no idea if I should read this book or not. Like, I don't even know what the person thinks about it.
The ones who say like, this is a book basically, and you're like, cool, got it.
Right, which is fine. Sometimes, this is all to say that I, as yet, don't have regrets as a critic, don't have regrets as a novelist. I hope that it's clear reading any of my writing that I really care about books, like not to like cry on the Zoom at 7:19, but that's why I wanted to write them. I care about the sort of possibility that is inherent in writing a book or making a piece of art, and I try to respect that as a critic as well.
I thought there was something so enlivening and kind of like literally just, when people say like it gave me life, like reading your book gave me life. It made me feel like there was potential in reading books that I had sort of like forgotten about. When you like occasionally you just forget that reading is good or fun, or that books are like not something that's just a horrible burden in your life. And your book really did it for me. I wanted to stick to like the sort of insider baseball like criticism stuff just for a minute, even though I'm sure you get asked about it a lot and probably find it tiresome by now. But this is like your New York event, like this is your New York launch. So I think if we were doing this in real life, like the audience would, as it actually kind of is, just like looking at who's here, the audience would kind of be full of like people who appreciate a little insider baseball stuff. So
Yeah.
that all being said, there are a lot of like really, there are I don't usually like to ask people about reviews of their own book because it's like a little bit like being like, show me on the doll where they hurt you. But because you are like a critic who pulls no punches, I feel like I might have more like carte blanche to do that. And also I'm just curious. My biggest question is like, what do you feel like people have gotten really right about the book? Like what did you intend that's like showing up in the reviews? And what do you feel like people are getting, like what's sticking in your mind as like particular criticisms where you wish that you could be like, no, like you're way off base, and conversely, what are you like, yes, okay, like you saw that, like you
What if I said I hadn't read any? No, I mean, I think that it's really hard to get a book in however long a review is, which is why I always write these really long ones for the LRB, because they don't give you a word count. And it's so inherently you're leaving things out. I have obviously, I like a lot of the reviews. I think they're really cool. And I also think it's really cool to see different people pulling different things out and seeing what they want to focus on, and sometimes they take the bait. I do think like there's a lot of like tricky, like someone would say trolly, but I would say postmodern elements in the book that you could fixate on if you wanted to. But I'm pretty happy that people are like, she uses her own Twitter profile as the Twitter profile picture as the Twitter profile of the picture of the character. But it's not, the point that the narrator is not me, I think shines through very clearly, because the plot is someone who discovers their boyfriend is a popular Instagram conspiracy theorist. And I think most people assume that did not actually happen to me, which creates a sort of like interesting continuum between the public persona of the author and the book. And I hope that it sort of neutralizes that general, like, as we say on Twitter, the galaxy brain take, where you're like, oh whoa, like the author, it is Ben Lerner, but it's not Ben Lerner, And I think that sometimes you can see my background as a critic in that kind of that playful element, because I am always like, oh, I know how you're going to read this, and I can sort of anticipate the critical response, and I'm sort of cutting it off at the pass, which I think is fun. And then ideally, I hope, seems like I keep going, and the point is not, I know what your criticism is, and I'm going to do it anyway, because I don't want to stop there.
It's fun to think of your book as situated within a genre. And when I was reading it, I was sort of thinking of it as being, I mean, you could probably argue for it being situated within many different genres, but the first one that came to my mind was books where the narrator is like way too smart for their own good, and you have the experience of being in the head of someone who's way too smart for their own good, which like can be really exhausting and maddening, but also very exhilarating. So I was thinking it was sort of like Elif's book, like The Idiot. I mean, it's like it was like it reminds me of a lot of like N+1 books, I think. Um, what are like when you were first starting to write it, were you sort of thinking like, oh, I'm going to write this like a kind of a book, or were you?
I mean, I was thinking really straightforwardly, I want to write the kind of book that I like, which is, I think many fiction writers have this sort of first person, third person drama at the beginning of working on their novels, and they switch, will switch from first person to third person. And initially I was like trying to do it in third person, and then I sort of realized all the books that I like best are in first person. Why am I resistant to this? Um, and also the reason why I like them is because it allows this sort of like freewheeling, voicey, stylistic thing where you're in the narrator's head, which I quite like. But I'm not, I've never thought this maybe outs me as I don't know. I've never thought of books as like being in the narrator's head, which is something that people say a lot. But I have never conceived of a first person novel that way. That's always my favorite part. I like a long paragraph where someone is parsing all of the implications of something that's happened for many pages, that is the great joy to me. So very basically that's why I wrote it that way. But I didn't, I was thinking of lots of different influences. I like Elif's book. I like Ben Lerner a lot. I think that that's clear. That's actually something that irritates me that I can say in public about the reviews is that a couple of people are like, she rolls her eyes at Ben Lerner, and I do not roll my eyes at Ben Lerner. And I just, if he's out there, I want him to know that I didn't roll my eyes at him. I'm a big fan. So I tried to sort of like get over the anxiety of influence as quickly as possible and just make it the way that I liked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I also think you can roll your eyes at Ben Lerner and simultaneously be a big fan,
But I definitely don't roll my eyes at him in this book. I think he's probably a very clear, but not too similar influence on my writing.
Who besides Ben Lerner is like, like a big influence on you?
I mean, I really like this sort of 70s, 80s metafiction stuff. Actually, I really like the Muriel Spark book that is really sort of meta. I really like Margaret Drabble does it, and a few of her novels too. I really love Margaret Drabble. I like Philip Roth actually. I like more recently, I think everyone knows at this point that I love Helen DeWitt, and that I find The Last Samurai to be like the best novel of the last 20 or 30 years, I guess 21 years now.
Yeah, talk about someone who's too smart for their own good.
Yeah, but what I always want to read like a smart person, right? And I maybe I've never understood this idea that a fiction writer has to be kind of stupid and has to sort of feign naivete or feign ignorance in order to move their story along. I have never connected with that at all, but I do think that that's something people are learning. I mean,
on the other hand, one could argue if one wanted to like really be like a devil's advocate that your narrator like takes it on faith that someone is dead without seeing a body or going to a funeral. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's dumb also.
Yeah.
That's something, yeah, she's obviously not.
Well, I think part of what I mean by too smart for your own good is that it's possible to spend a lot of time overthinking the wrong things and without, being able, and it obscures your view of,
for sure. And I think a lot of this type of character or person can tend to overinterpret things. And taking it back to social media, since that's why many of us are here, I think overinterpreting tiny things or sort of really interpreting things in the wrong direction is something that happens a lot on social media, particularly on Twitter, which much of this novel is concerned with, right? And some people on Twitter you could say are too smart for their own good, but you could also say some other things about them.
Yeah, like after the galaxy brain, we like go back to the like totally smooth brain.
Right. I mean, obviously everyone wants the Cinderella, like the, wait, Cinderella? No, not Cinderella. Which is the, oh my gosh, which is the one, Goldilocks. You want the Goldilocks take, which is not too big, not too small, just right. Sorry, I forgot all the fairy tales.
Dude, I'm right there with you. It's been a long ass snow day. So I just want to, I can't let, I'm sorry, I can't drop the review thing. I'm sorry. But what do you make of Perul's accusation that you do the same thing in this book that you sometimes do in your reviews, which is start it with like an anecdote about overhearing a snippet of conversation in which someone is an idiot, and then you get to like be smarter than that person in a, you know, in a illuminating way. Like, do you really, is this book, in your opinion, about someone who is like going around being smarter than everyone around her?
I don't think that she's going around being smarter than everyone around her. I think she's very alienated, right? And I think you can see her as this sort of like unlikable character with no redeeming qualities, even though she's quite entertaining, I hope. But you can also see her as like quite sad and quite like constantly, I think she does have, she's always trying in her definitely misguided and somewhat cruel way to get people to respond to her in whatever, you know, sort of, for lack of a better word, authentic, genuine way. And repeatedly they sort of disappoint her. And I think that the key part of the book that works as a response to that section of that review is the right after, so this is a spoiler, everyone, sorry, but it's also in review, so you probably already know. The conspiracy theory boyfriend, theorist boyfriend dies, and the narrator is very confused about her feelings. And she is sort of like sad for a bit, and then she's like, actually, now I don't even have to break up with him. But then all of her friends, and none of her friends know that he had this double life. And so they're all trying to console her in this really sort of like cheesy, kind of cheap way. And they're all sort of telling her, you need to go to therapy, you need to process your feelings. And they're telling her these things in these sort of like pat wrote sentences that I think we often learn like in therapy, or we sort of, there are all these sort of formulas for how to talk to each other that exist online and elsewhere in the content in the world. And she doesn't feel like anyone's like actually paying attention to her and responding to the things that she's saying about her life and her feelings. And they're all sort of telling her like, you need to process your feelings in an earnest and honest way. I'm not going to help you do that, but you need to go process your feelings. And so I think she gets quite frustrated with this and has a sort of negative reaction that kind of spawns many of her more grander delusions and deceptions, I guess you could say. So I understand that as a criticism, but I do really think that that it's that the narrator, what I am trying to do is show that she is looking around, like trying to find some way to live in a way that she feels okay with, and everyone around her is sort of, she feels closing her off in these different alarming ways. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think it can be really jarring and very upsetting to try and talk to someone about your feelings. And even if you're not doing a very good job trying to open up to someone and they sort of shut down with a rote worksheet style Mad Lib sentence, right? Which I think is her experience often.
Yeah, it reminds me of that bad tweet from a while ago where someone was saying like, you know, normalize being like, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with you right now. Like, do you have someone else that you can reach out to. And it's like, no, let's not normalize that at all, actually.
And I'm, not being super articulate, but I am at least sounding, I hope, authentic, right? And I think there's this sort of practice tone that many people engage in when they're trying to avoid talking to each other. And that is what I was trying to demonstrate there. And so this is all to say, a couple of the people are constantly parroting cliches at each other, and for good reason sometimes, but it's very disorienting and sad to be on the receiving end of cliches all the time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the book, the book kicks off and then a big chunk of it takes place during a time when like really, nobody was at their best in, the fall of 2016. Yeah, I think it makes more sense of that time period than I think. I don't know. I don't know whether I've read anything else that's like so explicitly set during like the beginning of the Trump era. I certainly haven't read anything else that was like has a big set piece scene during the Women's March, which I think is when the book sort of like kicks up into a different gear. Like observationally, I mean, because before that happens, the narrator is sort of like, narrating a lot of what she's narrating is the experience of like walking around while simultaneously looking at your phone, which is like it's great and immersive, and like I too felt as though I was walking around looking at my phone, but then looking up from the phone also is another thing that works in the book. I forget what I said. Oh yeah, when you were working on drafts of a book, were you in the draft structuring it with those sections?
Yes, I was. I came up with a plot initially, so I wrote through basically with these little, signposts of when something big happens, and I to speak about the realism or the feeling of like that's what exactly that very month-long period at the beginning of 2017 feels like. I just tried to keep it extremely realistic and to think realistically. If I'm walking from one place in Brooklyn to the other, I'm going to be looking at my phone all the time. So that's why I put it in, and that's how I tried to get that texture. But you were asking about the sections of the book.
Oh yeah, like whether they were something that was like that you carved out toward the end, or whether you had like planned those sections from the beginning.
Okay, yeah. So the book is divided into beginning, backstory, something happens, middle, something happens, middle, nothing happens, climax, and the end. And I really don't remember how I came up with them. I think I was writing long sections, and I was like, well, these don't really make sense as chapters because they're pretty long. There's only 6 of them, and it just sort of made sense, but I don't remember when I was doing that. I mean, the book is structured chronologically almost totally, except there's a backstory. So, and she tells it from she's telling it from the recent. She's telling it from her. It's happening in the past tense. So I think that those two things make it quite easy to narrate from an organizational structure perspective. Yeah, and in terms of the sections.
Is it like a schema that you think could be mapped onto other books?
Yeah, I mean the beginning, middle, end is a very classic.
Not enough of it, I think.
That is really the point. There's not a lot of things that are structured that way.
Yeah, you don't see it a lot these days.
You actually don't. And I find it very compelling to read a chronological story. And I play with it by having her constantly referring to the fact that she's narrating from the future and she knows what is going to happen and you don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I highly recommend writing that way. It's super easy because you can just really go from the beginning to the end. and that's not how to go back to the review question, that's not how I write my reviews, which are completely chaotic and these horrible Word documents that don't make any sense.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess it was easier for you, so I can't really argue with it. The idea that it is easy.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean,
I think it's hard to pull off. I guess when you write something just that's chronological the whole way through, you don't have anything to hide behind. You know, if you intersperse the chapters from like different characters' point of view, you can sort of like trust that the reader will have like sort of forgotten if you like mess some stuff up in like one of the parts.
yeah, I mean, also the thing about it is that it's very close to this one character's perspective. So the issue was more not putting in things that she wouldn't know, and because I think for all of her knowingness and all of her intelligence, there are lots of things that she often admits that she doesn't. She's always like, I don't know what that means, or like, I had no idea. And at the end, you know, what's revealed at the end of the book is that she actually has less self-awareness and awareness than she seems. So that was a bit difficult. I think probably there are some set pieces that I might have written a little bit out of order, but in terms of, I hope that it has this like propulsive quality, because there's this sort of like we're telling a story, like I'm going to tell it to you the way that I would tell it to you if I were talking to you.
Yeah, and also like it is kind of a mystery. I mean, there is like a mystery element.
Mm-hmm. I wanted it to be sort of a banal mystery, right? And a mystery that she has to make you care about, because who cares about this girl's boyfriend who's a conspiracy theorist? And she's sort of tormented by it, but it's quite obviously not that big a deal. And the idea of the boyfriend and ex-boyfriends shows up a lot in the book as well. And I find the non-married partner to be a very interesting, fruitful subject, because there's this real uncertainty and instability about how important they are to your life, you know. And if you say, you know, if you say, I thought it was quite funny, but also very true, that nobody, including the narrator, knew how to react to her boyfriend dying, particularly because she was planning to dump him anyway. and she really constructs this like, I'm going to dump him in the most perfect way, and I have to make sure that I reveal that I've snooped through his phone and discovered his secret identity, in this really cutting, like unsparing moment that's going to have high drama, and he's going to be devastated by her remarks, and then before she can do it, he dies in a bicycle accident. And so her grief is very complicated, but also her friends' reactions to it are like, you need to go to therapy, I do want another cocktail. Right.
I mean, yeah, they don't seem like the world's best friends. The Were there parts that you got stuck on? I mean, it seems like you had a really solid plan from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I didn't feel like I had a great writing day the whole time. And now I look back on it, I'm like, how did I do that? So yes, I think it was quite difficult to figure out when to stop. I think because there are lots of points at where she's really riffing, which is fun. And you know, you have to stop the riff and move the story forward a little bit at some point. And at what point is it good to do so? Again, the Goldilocks problem, like just enough riff, was ideal. But I also did conveniently, once she gets to, so she has her sort of mini meltdown and moves to Berlin, and then once she's in Berlin, she's like, what am I doing here? I don't have a job, I don't have anything to do, I don't have any friends, I don't speak German, I have no reason to be here, I have no reason to be anywhere. And I think that that's a very contemporary, very real experience for this milieu, that I start to feature in the second part of the book when she gets to Berlin. they have no real organizing principle for anything, and they have no real reason to do anything. And that's not necessarily bad, but it is quite difficult to depict a character who is really not doing anything and doesn't feel anything and is sort of confused. And she wants to get out of it, but she doesn't know how. So that, I think, is probably the most difficult part to write, which is where various structuring frameworks start to come in.
What was your experience with writing the lightly parodic, what do you call them? Like the snippets, the sort of, the Jenny Awful parts.
Oh, yeah. Well, another thing is that I had not read Jenny Awful at that point. So the idea that it's definitely about Jenny Awful is another aspect of the reviews that I'm happy to refute in public. So, and in general, I would say to anyone out there who is on Twitter, my subtweeting rule is that it has to apply to at least 3 specific individuals. And I think that that's something that we can all learn from.
Plausible deniability, yeah.
But also it turns it into a little, to use your word, like a bitchy little tiff into a broader critique of behavior.
Yeah, it's not a tiff, it's a trend piece.
Yeah, exactly. 3 is a trend. Anyway, so yes. So the fragments, so there's much has been made in the reviews. If you haven't read them, that's totally great. But there's a section in the book which is narrated in this pretty traditional, straightforward, long paragraph way. There's a section of the book where the protagonist is walking around in Berlin listening to a podcast, which is an interview with an author. And the author has written a book in fragments. And she's saying all this stuff about how the form is very particular to women. She thinks that women write in fragments often because their time is fragmented by their children and their caretaking duties, and that she, wrote in this way for those reasons. I was also thinking at that moment of this great Rachel Cusk line that I don't know where it's from. I think it's from an interview or something, where she's talking about people on the mom forum hating her for her memoir about having children, and one of them says, "How can she write such long sentences? She's a mom." So I was thinking about all these things together, and the narrator is listening to this podcast, and the woman makes that comment, and she suddenly gets the idea to start writing the novel in fragments, even though she says she doesn't like the fragments, and she finds that they're sort of overly meaningful and they insert a lot of unearned mood and tension into work. So then there's like 40 pages of fragments where she's writing the novels in fragments. And one, they're very fun to write. You can really go on forever. You really can just throw anything in there and it sort of works, as long as it's vaguely connected. And number 2, I think it works in the book because this is the moment when the narrator is very unmoored and she has no structure. So she's looking really for a structure, literally for a structure. And this is also when she's just started her project of going on fake OkCupid dates and making up a different personality for each one. So the fragment structure is actually really great for doing an iterative, but she's going on a bunch of different dates. She has a bunch of different personalities, which are interspersed with various banal things, like she needs to sign up for health insurance in order to get her visa to live in Germany, and she's ruminating about sex, and there's some sex scenes in there too, and it's just a sort of fun parody. And yeah, I also think she's embodying the thing that she's criticizing, and I think trying to understand what she doesn't like in a way, even if she won't necessarily admit that that's what she's doing, but she's really sort of I'll try this out. And the fact that I'm spending 40 pages about it doing that says something about not only how we live and operate today, but also the willingness that I have to accept the fragments theoretically, right?
Yeah, I'm satisfied. Okay, I'm sorry. I monopolized you for way too long, and I want to make sure that we have some time for audience questions. So drop your questions in the chat. I will ask them of Lauren, as many of them as I can, before we have to wrap it up. Lauren, like I have a ton more questions for you, but I'm just gonna have to like text them to you, some later date.
You can just at me on Twitter and I'll
um,
answer the question.
yeah, maybe I'll DM you. I think one of my questions was going to be, is reading good? But we can just like have a separate Zoom like just for that.
Short answer, yes, reading is good. I'm comfortable saying that.
Really? Is it really good? Is it always good? Like just reading, like anything?
Even reading things that are bad, I think is good, but we can talk about that later.
Bradley Lawrence asks, Lauren, while designing the conspiracy theorist boyfriend character, did you spend time on conspiratorial online message boards, like as part of your research process, I guess? And what was that like as a novelist?
Yes, I did. I wanted to keep him very separate from her and sort of really closed off, and she really can't access him in any way. So the idea for that came about because my boyfriend at the time wrote an article about Instagram conspiracy theorists. So I started writing the novel before QAnon. The novel finishes before QAnon exists. So there's no QAnon in it. And it wasn't a thing when I really finished it either. It was just like a sort of quirky internet element, like, look at these crazy people who believe all this stuff. But actually it's quite a big, powerful movement or force, maybe you could say. So I did spend some time on conspiracy theories message boards. I also looked at the Instagram because the fact that it's on Instagram keeps him even more sort of sequestered from the general population of conspiracy theorists. And so it's a really sort of like safe way for him to be a conspiracy theorist without like really seeming like he's actually into it. And one of the questions that comes up throughout the book, she can't really figure out if he's serious or not. Like, does he actually believe the conspiracy theories, or is he sort of propagating them for attention? For attention was the working title of the book also. And this is this sort of unstable element, I think, with all conspiracy theorists, particularly the popular like leaders, right? Like you don't know how much they buy it. And that was very interesting to me and very compelling to me, because she's pretty sure that he doesn't believe it, but then there are different points throughout the text where she's like, maybe he does actually believe this stuff. And there's always sort of like a little connection to reality in a lot of these things. And so they have this really compelling link where you're like, I see where you got this, but you've taken it way over here and now it doesn't make any sense anymore. So I was the short now to sum up, yes, I was looking at the conspiracy theorist boards, but I was also definitely interested in how someone would circumvent most ways of figuring things out on the internet and being like a relatively anonymous figure that you can't figure out, even though you have all of this information in front of you, and theoretically you should be able to research anything about them.
Oh wow, these are all really good questions. I want to ask.
Thanks.
We might have to do like a little bit of a speed round with them to make sure we get as many in it as possible. Coco Dowling asks, I was really interested in Kasia, who seemed to have an authentic conversation with the narrator, and wanted to know why the narrator never tried to find her again in Berlin. Why didn't she ever try to find Kasia in her quest to understand Felix's motivations, at least by like searching for her online?
That is a great question. So so there's the intro of the book, and then there's the backstory, and the backstory is the narrator has met Felix. in Berlin. He's her pub crawl tour guide, and he has a co-pub crawl tour guide named Kasia, who is Polish. And Kasia, there's this little moment when they're on the pub crawl where she tries to say, sort of like maybe warn the narrator, but the narrator doesn't know. And she's reflecting on this, and she doesn't know how much she was paying attention to her at the time. And it's sort of like, is she trying to, she says something like, Felix, he is really weird, no? Or so, just some like little line, like, he's a little bit weird. And she's like, yeah, haha, anyway, bye. And then goes and tries to get Felix to sleep with her. Just sort of ignores the question. Why she didn't try to find her? I think probably she doesn't want actually to know what she meant by it. And I would assume that Kasia is the type of person who has a very weird Facebook name that makes her unsearchable to anyone who doesn't know it, which it would be a realistic detail. But the sort of thematic, beautiful answer is that the narrator doesn't actually want to know.
I'm satisfied. Someone further up in the chat wanted to, Peter Dyer wanted to know what advice you have for aspiring critics. That's a doozy. Yeah. How do we become Lauren Oyler?
Don't. Well, I think there are lots of, this is unpopular advice, but I started writing criticism. I had a top 10 column for the website Dazed, which is the Dazed and Confused magazine in the UK, and I got paid £25 per article. And I wrote like a lot of top 10 articles, and they were all about books. For some reason, this magazine has a top 10 list for books all the time. So I wrote a bunch of those, and then while I was doing that, I started working with Jessica Crispin, who was doing Book Slut at the time, and I started blogging for her. And so unfortunately, the answer is that I wrote basically for free. And I think there are lots of really great websites where you can be sort of free to work on longer criticism and the kind of things that I get to write now very happily and very gratefully for magazines that pay. But the thing about it is that it's terrible, and you just don't get paid for it. So I would also caution you not to try and like go viral just to go viral, which I promise you is not what I tried to do with my pieces. But I try to be very honest without being cruel. And I think that those are the only real options I can give you. And I also, it's very hard because it's also really hard to pitch book reviews, because a lot of the book reviews assign them a long time in advance, and they really, really work on assignments, not on pitching. So it just sucks. That's my short answer.
Two questions that seem different but linked, and maybe you can kind of connect them in your answer. Alex McElroy asks, you talked about the imposition of cliched communication into conversations, especially in moments of crisis. How, as a novelist, do you engage with what might be accurate language / conversation of how people actually speak in a form that seeks to avoid such cliches? Like, I assume this means like avoiding cliches when you're like actually writing the dialogue, except for when you are like writing about how people speak in cliches. And then related to that, Fran Bigman asks, performing concern for others through canned responses like you should get therapy, but please don't expect me to listen to you, and performing a persona online seem linked. Do you think there are moments in the novel where the narrator experienced something more authentic, or is she always just disappointed because her concept of authentic is an unreachable goal? Have at it.
Great. Conspiracies. Hi, Alex. To the point about cliches, not conspiracies. Cliches are a conspiracy, maybe something to consider. I think that even when you hear the narrator speaking to other people, she is often speaking in a more sort of colloquial, probably cliche way. She's not speaking in this like highly weird, complicated style that I'm writing in. So I think it is very important to get dialogue right and to make it sound authentic and to not sound stilted. So I think it's fine, even if you're not seeking to make a critique of cliches in language, you should put them in dialogue because that's how people talk. And in terms of avoiding them, there's some little things that I do in the book. I often italicize basically like new jargon. So there's lots of contemporary sort of vocabulary words that feel quite new and weird, that are italicized throughout the book, which is a very simple way for me to use the word, to critique the word as it is being used by people online, without seeming to attach myself to the word. And in terms of, what was the second question? What the second question was?
That what we've just been talking about, and performing an online persona are linked, and does the narrator ever get experience something authentically, or is it just like ever receding in the distance, like a green light at the end of a dock or something?
Yeah, I think that she does. I think there are various points at which people are interacting with her really earnestly and honestly, and she has become so suspicious and paranoid of them basically that she even will accept it but can't participate in it in the way that she would like. I think even some of this sort of real extreme characters have moments where she's sort of empathizing with them and sort of admitting, oh, I'm not engaging with this person honestly, so no wonder she's speaking to me in cliches. I'm not giving her anything, right? And I think that there's a lot of reciprocity involved throughout the book. So even when these people are speaking to her in this sort of canned, depressing language, she is implicated in it in some way.
I think we have time for one more, right, Marius? Yeah? Okay. And for everyone else, these are great questions in the chat. I just want to point out that Lauren's doing a lot of other events with like a lot of really amazing people. I mean, just like wall to wall, all killer, no filler. I think there's one coming up with Nomi Fry. There's one coming up with Anna Wiener. There's one coming up with Trisha Lockwood. And, I think they'll all be different. I mean, Lauren and I talked a lot about book reviewing. Probably some of those other events will get more into like deeper into like being very, very online. And Lauren is going to talk about all kinds of other things as the gala online festivities for this book continue. So I just want to ask one final question. And then I think Maris will wrap it up by reminding everyone to like actually fucking buy the book, or borrow it from your library, put your name next to it for the next available hold. Oh yeah, this one, I really like this one. And it made me feel self-conscious about how we've been talking about the internet, because I feel like maybe we're a little bit incomprehensible to people who don't live on Twitter.
But it's so, what's fun about the internet and writing about the internet is that you describe it and it starts sounding so ridiculous, and you really have to explain each part, and then the response is always like, really, this is really what's happening? And it's like, yes, that's why it's so interesting, because this is really happening on your computer right now. Okay.
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, to like preemptively answer the question a little bit, like I do think it's important to write it down, to like describe the texture of
yes,
the stuff because it is so ephemeral. Alex Wexelman says, update, parentheses, sorry, once said, novels about the great cause of one year become obsolete the next. Do you worry that much of the social media elements of the book will be incomprehensible to a future reading audience?
I hope not. I did worry about that a little bit, but my solution to it was just to describe them very closely, and so to describe all their moving parts and to get like a little bit more detailed with them than maybe is comfortable, which adds the effect of making the book feel, as some people have said, nauseating. Because, as I just said, a lot of the things that happen on the internet are very stupid and deeply embarrassing. But for that reason, I think they say something about the human condition that is universal and eternal.
Yay!
What a note to end on. Lauren, Emily, thank you so much. Thanks to the audience. Please, as Emily reminded you, buy the fucking books. Put your name on the list at the library. Send an authentic tweet or two about the book, maybe. This has been so wonderful.
Yeah, this has been great. And I just saw someone pop up being like, when are your events? I will put them on my website and tweet them all the time. I don't know any other way to, you know, promote them except by doing those things, but I will scream about them. So if you found out about this one, in some way, you'll be able to find out about the other ones.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.